On the night of June 19th, 1975, a man was alone in his kitchen in Oak Park, Illinois. He was cooking sausages, Italian sausages, on the stove, the way he had done 1,000 times. Outside, it was a quiet suburban evening, the kind of evening that makes you feel like nothing bad could ever happen. Someone came in through the back door. Someone he trusted. Someone who knew the house. They shot him 7 times. 6 times in a circle around his mouth. The signature, in mob language, for a man who talked too much. The man on the kitchen floor was Sam Giancana, head of the Chicago outfit, one of the most powerful organized crime bosses in American history. And the man was murdered the night before he was scheduled to testify before the United States Senate Church Committee, investigating the CIA's use of organized crime figures in plots to assassinate Fidel Castro. He never testified. The case was never solved. And the secrets Sam Giancana carried to his grave included ones that reached all the way to the White House and directly through the living room of the most famous entertainer in the world, Frank Sinatra. To understand what Frank Sinatra did and what it cost him, you have to understand who he was in 1959. He was not merely a singer. He was not merely a movie star. He was the chairman of the board, a title his friends gave him that perfectly captured his relationship to the world. Frank Sinatra did not ask for things. Frank Sinatra decided things, and the world arranged itself accordingly. He owned a record label. He controlled which acts got bookings in Las Vegas. He had the ear of studio heads, politicians, and newspaper publishers. When Sinatra walked into a room, any room, the room changed. And Frank Sinatra had a friend, a close, loyal, dangerous friend named Sam Giancana. Their friendship was not accidental. Sinatra had grown up understanding that in certain worlds, the worlds of nightclubs and record deals and late-night favors, the mob was not the enemy. The mob was the infrastructure. The mob owned the venues. The mob controlled the unions that built the stages and drove the trucks. You did not become Frank Sinatra without understanding that. And Frank Sinatra understood it completely. By the late 1950s, Giancana was not just Sinatra's friend. He was, by several accounts, a financial partner in Sinatra's Cal Neva Lodge, a casino resort on the California-Nevada border. A place where, on any given weekend, you might find Rat Pack members performing, mob bosses gambling, and politicians relaxing in ways they would prefer not to be photographed. And then, in 1959, Frank Sinatra made an introduction. A young senator from Massachusetts was running for president. His name was John F. Kennedy. He was charming, wealthy, ambitious, and he wanted to win. He knew that in American politics, certain cities were controlled by certain people. And Chicago, the city that could decide the 1960 election, was controlled by Sam Giancana. Sinatra made the call. He brought Kennedy and Giancana into the same orbit. He hosted them. He facilitated. And because Frank Sinatra asked, Giancana listened. But Sinatra did something else. Something that would later prove catastrophic. He introduced both men to a woman named Judith Campbell. A dark-haired socialite, 25 years old, striking and discreet. Or so everyone believed. Within months, Judith Campbell was simultaneously the mistress of John F. Kennedy and Sam Giancana. A direct human connection between the President of the United States and the head of the Chicago mob, passing through the hands and the social calendar of Frank Sinatra. J. Edgar Hoover knew. The FBI had been watching all of them. Hoover called the Attorney General, Robert Kennedy, and told him about the calls between the White House and Campbell's phone. Reportedly, the calls stopped immediately after that meeting. But the relationship, and the knowledge of it, did not disappear. In 1960, John F. Kennedy won the presidential election. Illinois, Chicago, went to Kennedy by an extraordinarily thin margin. Historians have debated for decades whether Sam Giancana delivered that margin. Whether the mob, through its control of certain precincts and certain union bosses, helped put John Kennedy in the White House. What is not disputed is what happened next. John Kennedy appointed his brother Robert as Attorney General. And Robert Kennedy, perhaps the most aggressive mob prosecutor the Justice Department had ever seen, immediately launched a war on organized crime. Wiretaps, prosecutions, grand juries. Robert Kennedy went after the mob with everything the federal government had, including Sam Giancana. The man who had helped put John Kennedy in the White House was now being hunted by Kennedy's own brother. Giancana was furious, and Giancana made sure Frank Sinatra knew exactly how furious he was. Because Frank Sinatra had promised him. When the election was won, Sinatra had more than implied, that having a Kennedy in the White House would mean protection, access, understanding, a relationship of mutual benefit between the new administration and the men who had helped create it. Instead, they got Robert Kennedy with a subpoena. But the greatest humiliation was still to come. And it came not from Robert Kennedy, but from the president himself. In 1962, President Kennedy was planning a trip to California. Frank Sinatra had spent months, and a significant amount of money, preparing his Palm Springs compound to receive the president. He had renovated guest cottages. He had installed dedicated telephone lines. He had built a helipad, a concrete helicopter landing pad, specifically for the presidential visit. Sinatra told everyone who would listen that the President of the United States was coming to stay at his home. It was, for him, the ultimate validation. The ultimate proof that Frank Sinatra occupied a place no other entertainer had ever reached. Then the call came. The Secret Service had reviewed the guest list at Sinatra's compound. They had reviewed his associations. They told the Kennedy team that, given Sinatra's known connections to organized crime figures, it was not appropriate for the president to stay there. Kennedy stayed at Bing Crosby's house instead. Frank Sinatra learned about the change from Peter Lawford, the same Peter Lawford who had been the last person to speak to Marilyn Monroe. Kennedy's brother-in-law. Sinatra's connection to the Kennedy world. Sinatra never spoke to Peter Lawford again. And the helipad? The concrete helipad he had built for the President of the United States, Sinatra took a sledgehammer to it himself. According to people who were there, he worked in silence. He didn't shout. He didn't explain. He simply destroyed it, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. Sam Giancana's reaction to the Kennedy betrayal was not expressed with a sledgehammer. Giancana had a different set of options available to him. And in the years that followed, those options would intersect with some of the darkest moments in American history. Moments that historians are still arguing about today. What is known is this. The CIA approached Giancana and other mob figures about plots to assassinate Fidel Castro. The mob, which had lost its lucrative Havana casinos when Castro came to power, was highly motivated. The CIA provided resources. The mob provided men. And Sam Giancana, the man the Kennedy administration was simultaneously prosecuting, was working for the Kennedy administration's own intelligence agency. Whether those relationships extended further, Whether the web of betrayal and fury and desperate calculation that surrounded these men in 1963 had anything to do with what happened in Dallas on November 22nd is a question that has never been definitively answered. And Sam Giancana was shot in his kitchen before he could answer it. Frank Sinatra lived for 35 more years after the Kennedy betrayal. He became a Republican. He supported Richard Nixon. He performed at Ronald Reagan's inauguration. He reinvented himself, as he had always done, with the discipline and determination of a man who refused to be defined by anyone else's story. He never publicly discussed Sam Giancana. He never publicly discussed what he knew about the 1960 election. He never publicly discussed the helipad, or the humiliation, or what he had promised a mob boss in exchange for the delivery of a president. In his final years, Frank Sinatra suffered from dementia. His memory, that extraordinary, precise memory for lyrics, for faces, for grudges, began to fail him. He died in 1998 at 82 years old. His wife Barbara was holding his hand. His last words, according to her, were, "I'm losing." The FBI's file on Frank Sinatra runs to over 2,000 pages. It has been partially released under the Freedom of Information Act. Significant sections remain classified. Names redacted. Meetings that never officially happened. Conversations that no one will confirm took place. Frank Sinatra was many things. The greatest saloon singer who ever lived. A man of genuine generosity and volcanic cruelty. A patriot who helped elect a president, and a man who never forgave that president for what came next. He built a helipad for a man who never came. He destroyed it with his own hands. And somewhere in those 2,000 pages of government surveillance, the full truth of what Frank Sinatra knew and what it cost him is still waiting. The archive is open, but some doors were welded shut a long time ago. Welcome to Velvet Archives.